Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the November Lunch and Learn here at the Harmon Museum. I am John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian here. And there's some interesting things going on this month and the next month, December, and I thought I'd tell you about those. On November 29th, which is a Friday, we are having a display going on through January 4th, 160 years of Christmas. From the Biddle cabin outside the window to the mid-century modern room in the lower level of the Harmon Museum, we will have Christmas decorations from 1800, the 1840s, 1880, all the way up to 1950 and 1960. So also included in that display were a collection of antique Christmas ornaments, which once were on display at the Taft Museum in Cincinnati. So that'd be very worth your while coming by to see that display. On Saturday, December 14th, in the Beadle cabin, Santa will be there between 1 and 3. So if you are a fan of Santa and want to talk to him, or you know some young person who also needs to see Santa before the Christmas rush, please come and visit Santa at the Beadle cabin. On Saturday, December 21st, the Cartridge Factory Brewing Company in Kings Mill will unveil a special beer inspired by the Beadle cabin, Beadle Station Stout. So that Saturday it'll be unveiled. Come and enjoy that, please. And then finally, on Saturday, December 28th, here in the conference center, there will be a holiday soiree from 6 to 9. Elegant evening of fun, feast, and friends here at the Armstrong Conference Center. There'll be hors d'oeuvres, and there'll be a raffle and many other exciting things. So if you would like to celebrate the holiday without driving too far and welcome in the new year a day or two ahead of time, please join us for our holiday soiree. I also want to remind you that the gift shop here at the Harmon Museum has an artisan tree with unique ornaments for your tree or to give as a gift to someone, and is now also carrying Charlie Harper gift items. And don't forget, there's a 10% discount on anything you buy at the gift shop because you're attending here at the Lunch and Learn. Also, the Harmon Museum is open to you free, so check out that. As far as Lunch and Learn goes, on December 14th, we have a holiday concert from the Bones of Cincinnati, a group of trombonists who will bring you into the holiday spirit, and they won't need a microphone for you to hear them, so they are always enjoyable. The January 15th, our good friend Fred Compton will be here. 3 Centuries of Golden Lamb 2.0, he calls it, and he'll talk about more things he's uncovered and found about the history of the Golden Lamb and in his vast collection. Another good friend is Linda Martin, who is with us today. She will be here around Valentine's Day, actually only 4 days after Valentine's Day, on February 18th rather. She, in the past, she has shared with us her Halloween decorations going back decades, her Christmas decorations, her Easter decorations, and now, lo and behold, we found out about 6-7 months ago, she has a great Valentine's Day collection of decorations and cards and other things. So I think you'll enjoy that. Then on March 18th, we're going to have author James Ott talk about one of the greatest artists to come out of the Cincinnati area, Frank Duveneck, the greatest brush, a brief look at his life and loves. Now, our original speaker today was supposed to be Colonel Judy Pearson. Because of a medical emergency, concerning her husband. She had to cancel that, but she's tentatively scheduled to come back in May, just around Memorial Day. And once again, the plan is for her to talk about the Women's Memorial, Military Memorial at Arlington Cemetery. So there are a lot of exciting things coming up recently for the Christmas season coming up and things going into the new year. Well, enjoy your lunch, and in a few minutes we will have our speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Gail Rose. I'm the current president of the Board of Trustees for the museum and the Warren County Historical Society. On behalf of the board and the staff, I welcome you to Lunch and Learn, and I appreciate you being here. You have a real treat in store for you. When I first came to Lebanon, I came as the middle school principal, and I had an amazing staff of teachers. And on that staff was a teacher extraordinaire, Mr. John Zimkus. I have never seen a group of seventh graders be so enthralled by history as the students that were in John's class. Even now, I find myself, instead of doing the research and looking it up when I have a question, I just ask John because he always knows. So it's my privilege to introduce to you today our speaker, who's going to talk about a significant Revolutionary War person related to Warren County. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Zimkus.
Captain Robert Benham is a fascinating individual. I actually wrote this article on Captain Benham some years ago, and I entitled it, "Everyone Deserves a Helping Hand." As I go into the story, you'll know the significance of those words. Captain Benham, his family has done an awful lot over the decades and centuries in the Miami Valley. Jacob Burnett, who was a member of the territorial legislature with Benham, he also became an associate justice of the Ohio Supreme Court and eventually a United States Senator, once said of Benham, he possessed a great activity, muscular strength and enterprise, had a sound discriminating judgment, and a great firmness of character. Theodore Roosevelt, in his most ambitious writing, The Winning of the West, a 4-volume history, began in 1888 and finished it in the mid-1890s. Volume 2 was all about the early frontiers of the late 18th century, the late 18th century and early 19th century. And he included Benham's story in that. Henry Howe, who wrote a 2-volume history of Ohio, talks about Benham. Benham was born in Monmouth County, New Jersey, in 1750. When he was a young man, the family, he moved to a county just, Westmoreland County, just southeast of Fort Pitt, Pittsburgh. During the war itself, he worked with a Colonel David Rogers. A lot of people don't realize that there was an awful lot of fighting going on in the Ohio country, in the Northwest Territory. Many of the Native American tribes had allied themselves with the British in hopes that they would get their traditional land back. And although some were on the Patriot side, most were on the side of the British. In late August of 1779, an American Patriot force led by Colonel David Rogers was in Spanish St. Louis. St. Louis, Missouri, and all that area around there would later on become known as the Louisiana Purchase. But it was initially controlled by Spain. And it went back and forth between Spain and France a couple of times. But in this time, it was, in fact, Spanish. He had cargo loaded on some keel boats, and the mission was to have it go down the Mississippi and up the entire length of the Ohio River to Fort Pitt. Now, a keel boat, well, first off, going down from St. Louis, is that's going downriver. So you're going with the flow. But going up the Ohio River, that's where the keel boat came in. You move the keel boat either by rowing or poles where you actually pushed yourself upriver, or even a sail. It would be a 1,176-mile journey. They averaged about 20 miles a day. So we're talking almost 2 full months. In that group was Benham. Now, if you're like me, my first initial knowledge of keel boats was from a Walt Disney movie, Davy Crockett and the River Pirates. So these are keel boats. You pushed yourself upstream with the long poles. But they were a little bit more elaborate than that. They could carry that particular cargo. They had 2 to 3. Some sources differ as to what they had, but they had 40, 50-pound barrels of gunpowder, 2 tons of lead bars for making bullets, bales of clothing, crates of rifle, a chest of silver Spanish dollars, and several kegs of rum. They normally could typically be 40 to 80 feet long, 7 to 18 feet wide, and could carry as much as 20 to 40 tons of freight. And they had 3 of them, and they were making their way up the Ohio. On October 4th of 1779, now they began in late August, so we're talking at least 5 weeks. They finally got their way up to what is now Cincinnati, at the mouth of the Licking River, the river which flows into Cincinnati, flows right into Great American Ballpark. They saw some Indians. Now, today that river separates Covington on the west or left, and Newport, Kentucky on the right or east. In fact, I'll tell you a little something. Cincinnati's first name was Los Santiville. James Filson, one of the founders, named it that, and it actually stood for town opposite the mouth of the Licking River. So you have ville being town, anti being opposite, OS, I was told it means Latin for mouth, and of course L for the first letter of the Licking River. So Licking River mouth opposite town, or town opposite mouth of Licking River. So they see some handful of Native Americans. They are nearing some canoes, and Rogers had some 70 or so soldiers on the 3 boats. And so they thought it would be an easy thing to capture and contact these people. So they stopped the boats. They went up about a mile or so, and near a Sandy area near where Dayton, Kentucky is today, they attacked the Indians there. What they didn't know is that it was a trap. As soon as they got there, they were attacked by hundreds of Native Americans and some British soldiers. They were flanked on both sides. Indians came from behind, Indians came from the front. And within the first minute or so, 45 of the men were dead. Survivors often tried to regain their boats and ran to where the boats were put. But the 5 men in charge of the boats all got in one boat and left. So they went back downstream. There were some people who did survive initially, and one of them happened to be, oh, by the way, it was planned by a man named Simon Girty. Girty was a colonist who, at the age of 15, was captured by the Shawnee and then traded, if you will, to the Seneca. And he grew up as an Indian. And during the American Revolution, he sided with the British. And for many of the American colonists living in this area, he was referred to as the white savage or the renegade white or that sort of thing. Rather infamous in American history. Canadian history does treat him more kindly because he was on the British side. But he's the one, and he was only 38 at the time, and he's the one who planned the attack. One of the people captured was Colonel James or John Campbell. Campbell was an Irish immigrant. He was 44 years old at the time. He owned extensive land in Pittsburgh and would eventually own extensive land in Louisville. And about 15 years later, they would name where all this fighting took place, Campbell County, Kentucky, after him. This over here is where a lot of the fighting took place, in Dayton, Kentucky. He surrendered to a British sergeant who was there, thinking that it would save his life, and that did turn out to be the case. He and a few others were turned over to the British and then taken up to the Detroit area, where he eventually was let go. Also surviving that area was Captain Robert Benham. Benham, however, was shot in both hips and could not walk. So he crawled to where a fallen tree was and hid underneath the branches. He laid there for a full 2 days. He heard Indians running by and back and forth. After the battle, they came back and they went through the bodies and stole what they wanted and took souvenirs and other such things. But he laid there motionless and as quiet as he possibly could be. At the evening of the second day, he had his rifle with him, and he saw a raccoon on a tree. He took aim at the raccoon and fired. Almost instantly, he heard a human cry. He didn't know what it was. So he quickly reloaded his gun, his rifle, and laid there still Finally, there was another cry. Once again, not knowing what it was or who it was, he was prepared to defend himself. Um, Finally, a person yelled, "Whoever you are, for God's sake, answer me." It turned out to be another Patriot soldier, 44-year-old Basil Brown. Some sources say it was a man named John Watson, but most, and I do believe it was Basil Brown. He was about 18 years older than Benham. He too had lived through the battle, but he had two broken arms. Together, they made one human being, a man whose arms could work but could not walk, a man who could run and walk but could not move his arms. They would help each other survive for almost 2 months. One of the first things that Benham did is Brown found a rope and kicked it toward Benham. Benham tied it around Brown's waist and then held on to it, and Benham and Brown pulled him out from underneath the tree. Benham took parts of his shirt, ripped it, and bandaged Brown's arms. Brown would kick pieces of wood to start a fire, and Benham would start the fire. Benham would shoot game. Brown would find the game that was shot and kick it toward Benham. This went on for quite a while. One of the toughest things was finding out how to get water. So Benham still had his hat. He put it in Brown's mouth, holding the brim together. Brown went into the Licking River, up about neck high, and then just dunked his body down and came up with water in the hat. And that's how they got their water. There were wild turkeys there, and Benham was quite the shot, and he was able, well, first off, Brown went out and sort of chased around with the wild turkeys and sort of herded them toward where Benham was. And it was often said that the Benham could seldom fail to kill one or two every time they did that. They survived that way. Eventually, their wounds began to heal, but not completely. Brown was said to be able to use one hand to feed himself, and Benham was able to, with a small crutch kind of thing, move a little bit. They soon moved their camp closer to the mouth of the Licking River. Now, what we have here is two different views of a Licking River. The one on top is looking south, most likely taken from the top of Great American Ballpark. You'll see on the top one about, maybe a couple of 100 yards or 100 yards up the river, there is a bridge crossing the Licking River. That is probably where the bottom picture was taken, on that bridge looking towards Cincinnati. Finally, on the 27th of November, now remember, all that fighting took place on October 4th. On the 27th of November, they observed a flatboat going down the Ohio River, much like the one in this drawing. A flatboat is basically a glorified raft. It only flows in the direction the river is flowing. That's all it goes. It cannot go upriver at all. They yelled and waved their hands at the flatboat, but the flatboat wasn't too sure what they were looking at. Both men were nearly naked. They had 8 weeks of matted hair and beards and what have you. And there was many a time where Native Americans would pretend to be settlers to capture the settlers. Going back to reference another Disney movie of my youth, Light in the Forest. True Son, John Butler, a white boy kidnapped by the Indians, adopted by the tribe, finally as a older teenager. At one time, his Native American relatives, if you will, have him pretend to be a white man, and he's wearing "Come save me," he's saying in English. So these guys really weren't quite sure. The flatboat moved itself closer to the Cincinnati part of the Ohio River, avoiding the mouth of the river as best they can. Finally, going about a half a mile down the river, it stopped. And much like this boat over here, it had a canoe attached to it. And slowly, two guys got into the canoe and slowly paddled toward where they were. They finally convinced them they were legit. Benham yelled out his name and told his story and all these other things. So they finally did take him on board. They took him down to Louisville, which was Fort Louisville. That's the Ohio River. The fort is right over here. That is also, once again, going back to Disney. In Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, they talk about the Falls of the Ohio. That is at Louisville. There was sort of like rapids there. And you had to know your way around to go. So part of that is the Falls of the Ohio there. But when they got there, they did find out that a lot of their clothes was already there. Apparently, it was in that one keelboat which had deserted them 2 months earlier, and it had made its way to Louisville. Now, according to Beer's History of Warren County, quotes a publication called Western Annals. And in the Western Annals, it said, after a few weeks of doctor's care, they were said to be, quote, both were perfectly restored. I don't think so. I did come across just recently a pension application for Basil Brown. It was July 6th, rather, of 1789. He was 54 at that time. He was submitting it to the commissioners of the county in Virginia where he was living, and it certified that Brown was wounded in the service of the state of Virginia under the command of Colonel David Rogers on October the 4th, 1779. The commissioners proceeded to examine him, and it was their opinion that his wounds rendered him, quote, unable to get a livelihood, and therefore pray that he may receive pay as a pensioner. So he was at 54 getting his pension for being wounded in that battle. I had this to represent all the activity at Louisville, and that the keel boat which he was originally on being brought there. Benham became a citizen of Los Santoville, the future Cincinnati. In 1789, he would build the first two-story hewed log cabin, or house, if you will, in Cincinnati. That is an early painting of Cincinnati looking at the mouth of the Licking River. That would be on the left, that would be what today is Newport. On the right, that would be what is today Covington. He owned quite a bit of land in Cincinnati. This is an 1880 land in Cincinnati. He did own land on what is now Front Street, at 4th and Sycamore, and at 5th and Broadway. And in February 18th of 1798, he did establish the first ferry boat to go across the Ohio River. This is Broadway in Cincinnati, and this would be Front Street. So in this general area is where he owned land. That fortification on the right side is Fort Washington. The hill above Fort Washington is Mount Adams. In 1790, he was part of 1,500 men under the leadership of General Josiah Harmer in their ill-fated campaign against the Indians. The trail they left behind is called Harmer's Trace. Harmer's Trace is the red line over here. This would be Fort Washington. There's the Little Miami River. Lebanon would be right about there. They did camp in what would someday be Lebanon. Perhaps he remembered that. Going the wrong way. This 31, by the way, represents where Beetle Station was, where our cabin initially came from. That was an ill-fated campaign. Great military tactician, Chief Little Turtle of the Miami tribe, destroyed Harmer's army at what is now Fort Wayne, Indiana. A year later, what is now the Orange Route was Arthur St. Clair taking twice as many men to be destroyed once again by Native Americans at a place now called Fort Recovery, Ohio. You don't call it Fort Recovery unless you have to recover from something. And it was the greatest victory, or if you prefer, the greatest defeat, the greatest victory of the Native Americans, or the greatest defeat of the United States Army at the hands of Native Americans. 4 times or 3 times as many American soldiers were killed than in Custer's last stand. It was a phenomenal success. The green one would be Anthony Wayne, who would turn out to be successful. After his involvement there in 1794, he moved to Campbell County, Kentucky. He was named the first justice of the peace in the county, appointed by Governor Isaac Shelby. In the towns of Jamestown and Brooklyn, and that's what this is right here. Brooklyn and Jamestown, they were both incorporated in the 1840s. They were merged and reincorporated in the late 1860s as Dayton, Kentucky, which, by the way, is named after Dayton, Ohio. That green line on that map is Benham Street, named after Robert Benham. It goes up to the sandy area at the bend where much of the battle took place. That was often referred to, went by the name of Manhattan Bathing Beach. It was quite the place to go swimming in the Ohio River. It sort of disappeared when the Army Corps of Engineers decided to put up dams on the Ohio River to give it more depth. In February of 1797, he sold his land in Kentucky and moved up to what would someday be Warren County. He was elected to the territorial legislature here. Probably at that time, that's when he met Jacob Burnett. He also became one of the first justices of the peace in the Northwest Territory. Warren County was formed 2 months after Ohio existed. Ohio was formed on March 1st, 1803. It already had 10 counties, and another 8 to 10 were formed 2 months later. And so Warren County was one of those. It existed with the leadership of associate judges for 1 year, but the following year, on April 2nd of 1804, Robert Benham was elected county commissioner. He was one of our first county commissioners. Also serving on the county board was Matthias Corwin, the father of Governor Tom Corwin and the brother of Lebanon's founder, one of Lebanon's founder, Ichabod Corwin. He was reelected in 1805. And the first courthouse was, in fact, the Black Horse Tavern. Now, the bar in the Golden Lamb is called the Black Horse Tavern. The original Black Horse Tavern was 1 block to the north across the street where the LCNB National Bank White Bank building is. That is in that block is where the Black Horse Tavern was. And it was like the old cowboy movies. You close the bar and hold court. So from May 1st of 1803 to January 1st of 1806, that was Warren County's courthouse. Benham died in 1809 at the age of 59. He had a farm southwest of Lebanon, about 3 miles away, according to some sources. On Sunday, April 24th of 2016, I had the privilege of speaking at a dedication of this little monument here in the Pioneer Cemetery, listing the American Revolutionary War veterans who are buried in Lebanon's 3 pioneer church cemeteries, the Baptist Cemetery, the Methodist Cemetery, and the Presbyterian Cemetery. Also, in the Pioneer Cemetery, where that monument is, this over here is the grave of Francis Dunleavy. Dunleavy was also a member of that territorial legislature, and so the two would have known each other. Now, we have an 1875 map of the 3 church cemeteries. We have the northern part of the Pioneer Cemetery being the Baptist Cemetery. We have the southern part of the Pioneer Cemetery being the Methodist Cemetery, or Methodist Episcopal, that's why it's ME. Technically, the Baptist Cemetery was a graveyard because their church was actually in the cemetery. This area right here has no burials because that's where the church was. Okay? So if you ever visit there, there's what is the northwest corner. There's no markers there. It's because that's where the original church was. Now, you can't visit the Presbyterian Cemetery. Well, you can, but what you'd be looking at is a deserted car dealership. Where that building is where the Presbyterian Cemetery was. The Presbyterian Church around 1905, it was the oldest of the three church cemeteries. Around 1905, sold the cemetery to the village of Lebanon. When it became private property, I don't know. But it was sold. Many of the markers were moved into the Lebanon Cemetery. So if you go into the Lebanon Cemetery and you happen to see all these late 19th century markers, and right next to it is a stone which looks so much older, it probably was moved there. But there also is another area which is left over from the Presbyterian Cemetery. These are both pictures of the Presbyterian Cemetery once removed. They took about 50 markers, and as you can see, behind every marker there seems to be another one. They moved them over here to the Lebanon Cemetery. Now, there used to be a fence right here. The cemetery has bought more land over here, but the fence was over here. This is looking north. This is looking south. So if you want to see it, go into the Lebanon Cemetery, veer to the left, and then just go up the road, and you can't help but see it. Benham did not have any inscription on his stone. Although at his death, it was said that a troop of cavalry soldiers were there honoring him. He did not have an inscription. So whether or not his unmarked grave is somewhere in the Presbyterian Cemetery once removed, I don't know. But he was buried with honors here without an inscription on his marker. I used to tell my seventh graders, of course, back in that day, there was a Dodge dealership, now vacant, but there was a Dodge dealership there. And I told them, have you ever heard of the movie Poltergeist? If mom or dad buys a Dodge and a bony hand comes through the floorboard, they didn't move the bodies. And to be totally honest with you, they didn't move the bodies. They did, according to the history of the Presbyterian Church, take 2 shovelfuls of dirt to represent moving the bodies. That's all they did. Of course, the bodies back then were not embalmed. I do not have a painting or likeness of Captain Benham, but I did find a copy of his signature. The Benham family history, written in 1952, does say Captain Benham lived an extremely full and adventurous life. Boy, he sure did. Thank you. Anybody have any questions I can answer for you? Yes, ma'am. In Centerville, we're talking about being right on 48. Yes, there is a Benham Grove there. Most likely it is connected to this Benham. A lot of his family was in the area. His sister, Catherine, married a Van Cleve, and she was, I believe, the great-grandmother of the Wright brothers. His nephew, Benjamin, I believe his first name is Benjamin Van Cleve, is credited with being a founder of Dayton. So there are Benhams up that area. There were all through the Miami Valley, Benham family members. So there is, I would bet the house that there's a connection. A direct descendant, I'm not quite sure. He did have a son who became a prominent lawyer in Cincinnati, and his name was Joseph Benham, and he delivered an oration at the reception of Lafayette's visit to Cincinnati in 1826. But yeah, there are Benhams all over the place. So there's definitely a connection. I don't know exactly what it is, but there is a connection. Anything else, folks? Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your substitute lecturer today. I spent, I just made this up in the last 2 weeks, and it took a lot of time, but I got it done now. And so, so don't forget to visit the gift shop. Don't forget to visit the museum, and hopefully I'll see you next month at the Lunch and Learn. Thank you.